Hello. Schools are a powerful sites for change and social transformation. And to fulfill this transformative promise, we must revolutionize what we teach and how we teach it. The curriculum must expand its scope to include a strong focus on democratic values of equality and liberty. Lessons in equality, and particularly gender equality in today's time, are as important as lessons in math, science, history, and language, and should be instilled in students and teachers alike. We would all agree that school education is a good place to facilitate mindset change. On this note, we begin our today's topic of discussion in our Connect series: the importance of gender literacy in school to preempt the heteronormative idea at an early stage and envision bringing up a gender fluid generation. Here with me to continue this dialogue, I have Ms. Porma Maiti, a mother, dancer, an avid reader, a cook, and she finally adds, with reluctance, for a living she works as an editor in a leading publishing house. I also have with me Dr. Rakhi Ghoshal, who is a social science and bioethics researcher working in the broad domain of gender and reproductive health. Let us kick off the discussion with my first question to Rakhi. Gender equality for most of us still equates with uniform rights for men and women, which again itself is simply determined by the genitalia. But in a world where we are discussing about gender performativity and looking towards gender fluidity, do you think we need to make more conscious conversations with our kids? Rakhi?
Thank you, Dvita. And I would like to take this opportunity first to thank you and Orkhodev for asking me to share my views on this very, very important topic. To think through the question you've just tabled, I would say that it had been very important in especially the 17th and the 18th centuries to start the debate around equality, gender equality, start focusing on the very concept of equality, the equality of the sexes. As you rightly pointed out, that the entire identity tends to focus on the genitalia. Historically speaking, when we were living at an age when wives and children and slaves were treated as personal property and slashing them once in a while was socially approved, when women were hardly more than childbearing machines, when women could either be a homebound wife to be controlled by the man or the public woman to be sexually enjoyed but socially treated as trash, we had to start by demanding equality, equal rights, the right to vote. But that was more than 200 years ago. And much has changed since then. And we need to adapt our minds and our mindset. So many glass ceilings have been broken, but many remain. So to answer your question specifically, yes, the concepts of fluidity of gender and gender roles, the breaking of stereotypes are absolutely important to be introduced to the young generation of today. Possibly build them into the daily conversation from an age as early as 5 or 6, I would say. But since in many parts of the world, in India, in our cities too, basic equality of the sexes still remain a distant cry, unfortunately, a distant dream. To start the conversation may well be made with the concepts of equality still, I would say. Examples of where basic equality has not been achieved in today's world include the child sex ratio at birth, rates of immunization of boys versus girls in India, definitely in India I'm talking about, the under 5 mortality ratio, ownership of property, the decision making in the family, access to higher education, for instance. And these, we all have data for these in very transparent and nationalized data sets such as the National Family Health Survey, which show the growth inequality between the sexes. So to start the debate, equality can well be a starting point. Thank you.
That's a very interesting point that you made. I mean, the inequality in other aspects is definitely kind of, we all know generally about, but the immunization inequality that you spoke about was quite interesting. An insight that even like I would perhaps would be interested to take further, maybe in a conversation aside with you. But my second question would be to Poroma, and I would like to ask you, Poroma, do you think that introducing gender literacy in school curriculum will also indirectly help parents kind of restructure their own heteronormative ideas?
Well, again, let me just begin with thanking you for having me in this discussion. To your question, Doitadi, I would like to say yes, that would be a very hopeful kind of a response. But in practice, I don't see how much just changing school curriculums or syllabi could affect a particular mindset that one has grown up on or with. If the grounding has not been that solid at home or in immediate social circles besides schools, then it might be difficult to change them completely. If you change the syllabus or curriculum in a school, the children may benefit, of course, yes, and that is a good place to start, definitely. But how much they will be able to, percolate it upwards to their parents and generations beyond, that is a hopeful idea. We may, of course, begin with that, but I don't see how much that can help. But I'm not saying that that should not be done. I'm actually saying quite the opposite, that that should be done, because parents of school-going children now would be about our age or a couple of years older and all of that. So I don't think they'll be extremely rigid to change. They would be amenable to change. And why not? Let's begin. Schools may need to change their curriculum, their syllabus, and also, I think, require more hands-on participation of the parents in the day-to-day activities and the operations of the children. Set tasks for children that require the active participation of the parents, so that it's not just a homework that they need to do and submit it, where parental participation can be done without. So once the parents begin to actively participate in these kinds of things, they also possibly begin to internalize these things. And to that effect, I think it is a very good idea to begin, and not just have it as one subject that teaches or advocates gender literacy, but weave it through all the subjects, across the subjects, and make it a part of a lifestyle, make it a moral value, make it an important ethic. And I would even say, make it something that also possibly needs to be tested. So I think, parents have that fear. How the marks factor is a very important thing for parents. So once you begin to, test the kids, and parental involvement, in those spheres is very severe. So once they know that, oh, our kids are going to be tested on these issues, then I think the level of internalization is only going to get stronger. But that's only, I think, fingers crossed. We should, of course, begin. So yes.
Yeah, hope. That is what keeps us alive. I would also like to ask Rakhi that how do you think we can redefine the gender pedagogy?
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. So to reflect on the importance of introducing gender discourses, discussions around gender in school curriculum, well, most schools in India in today's day, as far as I understand, and I might be wrong on the data here, but as far as I understand, they do not yet have structured courses in what we could contingently call as gender studies. I do not think that gender studies is available even at an undergraduate level in India. Maybe now in some of the upcoming private universities they might have, but the last I checked, at least in the existing traditional public universities, the introduction to gender studies was only at the master's level and upwards. So on the one hand, I understand the logic and I respect the historical debate behind this. which is, to sum it up in a line, gender studies, which, though it should not be, but seems to be synonymously used in academia as women's studies in India. It was more of a political movement, and it was not a disciplinary pursuit, and it was essentially an interdisciplinary frame of understanding discourses and debate. And gender and women's studies was expected to permeate all possible disciplines, including the natural and the medical sciences, and not be limited to only being a disciplinary space in itself, a particular department in a university. So that's the historical struggle that women's movements in India had. But later in the 1970s, the first university in Bombay, SNDT, it had its own women's studies course, and gradually it got institutionalized across many universities at the master's and upwards level. But it's not there it hasn't yet percolated down to the level of the school. I'm in strong support of the need to introduce the basic concepts, the basic questions, and the fundamental histories of this domain of gender studies at the school level. Students should not have to wait till they're adults to start knowing about the history of these gender-related struggles, which were there in so many of the countries that we know of, not just India. Gender is not about women. It's about, and it's a fundamental acknowledgement that we need to have. It's not about women, though that is what it seems to imply in many contexts. It tends to be synonymous. It is about, gender is about acknowledging and respecting every identity, the possible alternatives of human identities. It's being inclusive. It involves being comfortable with different gender, and gender studies tries to assimilate all of these trends or all of these attitudes in a person, which definitely should be part of a child growing up. I believe that a robust integration of gender pedagogy at the school level would also work to make us more inclusive on related issues and identities such as caste, class, race, and religion. A person who is deeply gender sensitive will not be a fanatic when it comes to, for instance, religion, because that person has already acknowledged and accepted in his or her mind the fact that people are different, and there is no point in trying to homogenize people or homogenize identities. So the very important awareness and the cognitive empowerment that gender studies brings in is so very vital, especially given the extremism that we tend to see around us in a present time. It's so important that it starts to, children from a very young age start to imbibe these questions and concepts, and definitely thus it should be made part of school regular pedagogy. My thoughts. Thank you.
Paroma, do you want to add something? I just felt that maybe...
Not really. I completely agree with what Rakhi said. And what I found important was to add that, not necessarily add to what she was saying, but in agreement with what she was saying, that, you know, efforts are being made. I mean, there is still no separate discipline called gender studies, certainly not at the graduation level in India, and nothing beneath it, not in the school level. But efforts are made to, you know, slip in little things, but those are so few and far between. In history lessons, for example, we do talk about the suffragette movement and the importance of being, you know, tolerant, and you know, different doesn't mean bad, or you know, things like that. So they are trying to be woven into the regular syllabus, but how far? I mean, I don't see it being completely effective unless it is taught across subjects, across classes, and not just in an isolated chapter of one particular subject. Because then what happens is children tend to, you know, they veer towards rote learning, mug that bit up and just vomit, as they do with subjects that are not really integrated into the entire fabric of education. So I think, though there are instances, these really minor instances, but but they are there, but I don't see them, bearing fruit unless they are woven into the larger structure. So that's my only two bit to add in agreement to what Rakhi said.
So Rakhi, my next question would be to you. Since teachers are the primary instructors and work as the agents of the change that we envision for the future, so how important do you think is it to introduce gender discourse in teacher training courses?
It's absolutely, yes. It's absolutely very important that we introduce gender discourse in teacher training courses. It's the absolute first step. Because unless we teachers are aware of these concepts, the histories, the basic questions, we would not be able to pass these on to the students. As my interlocutor Poruma had been has explained already to us so nicely, that the students are almost there, they are ready to accept it, but are we ready to pass it on to them? I remember having read about a study conducted in a country in sub-Saharan Africa, which showed a study of gender sensitization of school children. They were in the middle school. It showed that gender sensitization at a young level, especially in co-education schools, led to a lowering of gender crimes such as stalking, sexual harassment, e-thieving, and rape in the neighborhood. So clearly, students are receptive to change, but we should be ready to make the change happen in the student community. So clearly, we need to get these out to them, catch them young, as they say. But we cannot if we ourselves are still soaked up in obsolete ideas and outdated worldviews. Something, a doubt which, again, Poruma so eloquently placed on the table a while ago in this conversation, as to we adults come with such a lot of baggage. So can we even be able to make that change happen, make the impact on the students? That's a question we need to think as adults. So yes, a starting point is to integrate gender and gender questions in teacher training courses, no matter what the core discipline of the teacher be. If he or she comes from history or chemistry or mathematics, doesn't matter. Everything has underlying overt as well as covert undertones of gender and gender biases and gender stereotypes. So it's very important that these be unpacked and explored during teacher training courses.
Yes, thank you. And I'll take the cue for my next question to Poruma from you, since you mentioned about the co-education school. One thing that bothers me is the relevance of the single gender schools in today's time, when the need of the hour is to inculcate ideas of inclusiveness in every sense and every space. So Poruma, what is your take on this?
Dvaitadi, I personally went to a single school, a single gender school. Now, I don't think that that by itself, makes or breaks your level of gender sensitivity. But to exclusively go for single gender schools, I don't see a point in it anymore in today's world. So yes, it is. It perhaps makes more sense to send a child to let's say a co-ed school than to exclusively hunt out a single gender school. Because see, at the end of the day, it is the school is made up of the teachers, the values that it follows, and if the kind of training that the teachers come with. This is taking a cue from your previous question. So those can be imparted in a single gender school as much as they can be imparted in a co-ed school. Now, how these are imparted, I think, to me, matters more than where they are being imparted. Because when I went to college, which was a co-ed college, I saw a lot of kids coming from co-ed schools harboring a lot of these conservative, rigid ideas about gender, even though they had gone to co-ed schools for 14 or 12 years. And I think that a lot of that had to do with the kind of values they were brought up in at home. So a school can do only so much. They can hone a particular quality or a value, but they can't, change it or make it or break it completely. So yes, in today's world, I would personally say that a co-ed school tends to be more inclusive, tends to teach values of inclusiveness and the level of curiosity, unhealthy curiosity towards the opposite sex is kind of balanced out. It does not require you to attain a certain age before you can actually begin your journeys of discovery or whatever. So I mean, I've seen those kinds of curiosities even from children coming from co-ed schools and not so much from single gender schools. So I don't think it would be fair to generalize and say that this is better than that. But yes, I think that co-ed schools tend to make you more sensitive, more inclusive, and more tolerant. So I don't see a need for a single gender school as much as I don't see a need for a co-ed school. But if you're asking for a personal preference, I would say that it would be better that my child learns about the differences as well as the similarities and begins to respect those in a co-ed school. Because earlier we had a different value system to fall back on, where children would go to school and then come back and have a different set of friends at home where they would go out to play with, and those friends were made up from all kinds of both genders. And so that curiosity was somehow quelled when you made friends in your own society or in your own neighborhood. But that is going down. Children no longer have as many friends as we used to. So their entire thing is kind of predicated on the kind of friends they make at school. So if that is becoming the only space outside home, then of course, I think a co-ed school makes a world of a difference. So yes.
Right. Rakhi, would you like to add something?
I completely agree with what Paroma shared. And I would just like to sort of reinstate her views that it's really not absolutely necessary to make children aware about gender or gender sensitive to have to sort of not have single sex schools. So it's not that if you have a single sex schooling, then you would automatically grow up to be less amenable to gender sensitivity. Those things are not correlatable. I grew up till my class 10th, I was in a all-girls school. Even my college for 3 years, it was in an all-girls college. So, but then gradually I have been working in areas of gender equality, gender rights. So, and I have male friends who have been till their class 12. They have been in all boys schools and colleges later, but they are absolutely hardcore pro-gender feminists. Not just pro-gender, but absolutely hardcore feminists in the very right sense of the term hardcore. So it's about something in the way children are exposed to the entire gamut that life offers us through media, general conversations at home. These things actually shape up the mind of the child. So all of us on this panel today would recollect that I think a few weeks ago during the lockdown at some period, there was this news which became it went viral about how some school boys, class 10 boys or something, they were in a co-ed school, and they had a WhatsApp group where they were actually morphing the faces and bodies of their the female classmates, and they were talking about how you can go and how you can sexually abuse her, sexually assault that so-and-so female friend of theirs. So it's a co-ed school. So clearly something was not working out. So clearly it cannot be just an end in itself that we have 50 boys and 50 girls and our responsibility is over as teachers or policymakers. We just have co-ed schools and everything will it will happen in due time. It will not happen. A lot of other things have to be done. That's just a starting point, as Paroma so eloquently put it, and I just wanted to agree with her. So, thank you. Those were my thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both. That was very insightful. And yes, actually, even I agree that perhaps it has nothing to do with a single gender school or co-ed school. I mean, what we discussed just before this, that even the perspective of the teachers, need to change. the parents and the teachers, what we kind of discussed. So if that is not changed in the first place, it doesn't matter which school I'm going to, because I'm even at school, there would be discrimination from the teachers. And even if I'm going to a co-ed school, and if I come back home and I have parents who kind of hold on to those conservative ideas, I would grow up, with completely deprived of the ideas of gender and equality and something. I would also want to ask one final question that this both of you have kind of said before as well, that can we highlight gender issues or read subjects from a gender perspective?
Yes, Dotati, like I said, that it cannot, gender sensitivity or teaching about equality in a broader sense of the term cannot just be, relegated to one subject, to one class, to one period. It has to happen across the entire, spectrum of education that a child goes to school for. So I think that it has to be woven in subtle ways in all subjects in whatever way possible. It cannot be shoved down the throat in a way that, it kind of stares at you. Oh, suddenly in a chemistry class, okay, here's gender sensitivity. If you do that, the child is bound to notice and perhaps, take a step back and not be interested in the subject itself. That's not the idea. But to gently weave in and talk about, issues about gender equality in so-called unrelated subjects like physics or a chemistry, and talk about female achievers in those fields and encourage. And this is, I think, where your question about the importance of teacher training comes in. How the teacher brings forward, if it's a girls' school or if it's a co-ed school, how she involves the girl child or the boy child, I mean both of course, but because we know what the real ratio is in this country, I tend to say girl, to involve her and tell her that this is what you can do, see this lady had done this, and not make her feel special just by dint of a gender, but also not to, involve her in class activities, in science classes particularly, as much as she would do a boy. Because I've seen that in science class especially, teachers tend to throw questions at the boys, say for maths or whatever those things, because it is assumed somehow that the analytical and logical mind of boys is better or greater than that of girls. To subtly kind of erase those differences without making it obvious would be a good starting point, I feel. And in other classes, say social science classes, language classes, of course, to include stories that would inspire and interest the kids, stories of inspiration or mundane stories that bring out the issues of equality, very very normal day-to-day stories of courage. Also, I think particularly in social science classes, and to begin from a very very young age, so that the process of assimilation and incorporation begins that much earlier. So not to burden the child with heavy stories or stories with a lot of jargon, say gender equality and all of that, but to subtly talk about both parents being involved in a very normal day-to-day chore. So when they go back home, maybe this is how this can happen. Like your first question, to answer your first question again, that how does it reflect on the parents back home, a changing of the syllabus or the curriculum, when they learn something, when there's a lesson for a class 1 or a class 2 child, where there are illustrations to engage the child, there are illustrations and stories where both sets of parents are working at home and outside, and to respect that whatever is being done at home by the mother, if it is the mother who's doing all the work at home, to respect that and not to treat her as just a homemaker or just somebody who doesn't work because it does not earn money necessarily, or that a father could also be a stay-at-home father and take care of the child. I think that is a very very important thing to begin telling children, that your father does not have to go out and work while your mother has to stay home at work. Your father could also stay at home and work. Little things like these, when a child is taught these things, and when it becomes a part of his or her value system, I think that helps a lot, rather than having one particular period or class or subject at that age. I'm talking about the tendermost ages, when you are most receptive to change and taking in values. So I think that should begin early, and this is one of the ways how one could possibly begin. Add one little thing to what you said. Why I feel that it is important to talk about the fact that it's okay for men to be taking care of children. I think I would go one step further and say it's not just okay. There are times when it is needed, especially in cases of new parents. I think everybody in the world, especially men, seem to know what a maternity leave is for. I think I'm stretching it a little further, but I think what I'm trying to say is that it is important that these values start to be ingrained early on, so that even in workspaces, when even the men know, like I was saying, that maternity leave is for the mother to take care of the child and the father doesn't need it. Well, everybody needs it, and a maternity leave is not for the mother to who's as new to parenting as the father is, only to take care of the child. Her body needs to heal. This is why she needs the leave. So the father needs to be at home. The fact that a father can be at home and sometimes should be at home, I think is something that needs to begin early. So if this is started early, from the ages when children go to say are in class 1 or even lower, then I think by the time they grow up, there's hope for our future generation. They will not come and say, I don't need a paternity leave. Oh, yes, you do. So I think it should begin early.
Absolutely. I'm Rakhi.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with both of you. Just some thoughts strung together. To mention what to add to what Doita was saying, that yes, we tend to highlight at times while it's a fragile balance, because on the one hand we are talking about that historically there has been so much of inequality, that we need to talk about equality. We need to focus on these histories. At the same time, to keep on constantly highlighting as if it were sort of not a norm but an exception is also damaging in some extent. So that finding that very delicate balance as how much you talk about equality and how much you try to normalize it is the real question for the adults, for the teachers, for the policymakers. First among girls. So in the merit list, you have the first candidate, and supposing it's a boy, then you have first among girls, who could be the 20th person on the merit list. So Madhyamik first and first among girls. So you have two lists. Yes. But even if the top 3 candidates are female, you do not have the first among boys, who's the 4th on the merit list. So those very small things are always there. Coming from the history of where women had to fight to even get the right to study, to go to a university, it makes sense. Historically, it's very important. We should not forget the history. But to highlight it so much in a present days, perhaps we need to think 2 times, 3 times about that. Starting with making it normal, starting with stories, Paroma, absolutely agree. Starting with fairy tales, the way fairy tales, sort of keep on reinstating the very gendered ideas of this female who is perpetually beautiful and perpetually she's sleeping, and the man has to come riding and will wake her up from the sleep, and they will be married happily ever after. So you can be, as they say, you can be either happy or you can be married. To be both is a bit rare, but that's what the witch.
Not to forget the witch. Not to forget the witch.
We won't forget the witch. Witches were burnt and witches are there in fairy tales. So witches are these female figures. And historically, we know that witches were traditional healers. They would provide abortion services to women. They would have access to a lot of local herbs and this and that. So basically, they were doing things, providing service, which were not appreciated by mainstream patriarchal society. So records say that in France, I'm forgetting the name of this village, but the parish records say that up to 400 women were burnt in a day across different neighborhoods. So that's it about witches. We have them from Shakespeare till now. We have it in rural India, a lot of places, there is the witch hunt still going on. It's important to start with stories. It's important to rewrite stories for children where we show that both the parents are working. And Goldilocks, when she walks into the bear's house, it's always the biggest bowl for the father, the biggest chair for the father. So a mother can be very big in size, a father can be thin and might need the smallest chair. So stories have to be rewritten. We have to talk about different families, as Dwaita very correctly and timely pointed out. I am a single mother myself. So my daughter, when she grows up, she will see that, okay, there are families where the father is not always present. There can be other forms of family. We can have two mothers in a family. We can have two fathers. And parenting is not just about a biological male and female together in the same house. We need to talk about the bodies from an early age. All this hoo-hoo, ha-ha, shush-shush. So talking about menstruation, I really appreciate, leave apart political differences or affiliations, I appreciate the fact that menstruation was mentioned by the Prime Minister yesterday from the Red Fort. So it's easy to label everything as political propaganda or agenda. I mean, of course, everything that a politically prominent person says will be part of his or her agenda. But part of his or her agenda, even if it's that, how many of us have spoken about the need for menstruation? So even to talk about it, mention the word is something. So films like Padman should be made. We should talk about, because it's such a natural part, natural process of the female body, but we don't expose the boys to it. We tell our daughters because they'll start having their periods, but we don't tell our boys about it. And they all, we talk to our male friends now and they'll all have stories to share about how they would slip in to see what is there in the girls' washroom. It's a very common history which is there, and you talk to your male friends now and most of them will have such stories to share. It's important to talk about the body, about shame. It's important to build in history, talk about the Bronte sisters, talk about how women did not have a room of their own, how they had to write in a shopping list and, the backside of used up papers, they were writing novels. They could not publish with their own names. So these are stories you can tell a 6-year-old that, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, women, they wrote, they had to take the names of men. So they had to be names like Acton or George. They could not be Charlotte and Mary and so on and so forth. So that is a small story, but it tells so much about the challenges that a lot of women face. And because of their sacrifices, we are here today. So it's important to remember that and remember in the Indian context, the struggles of people like nationalists like Vidya Shakur, who fought for the rights of girl children to study, for widow remarriage, Pandita Ramabai, who was so ahead of her time that she was just ostracized by different levels of society, one after one, and twice and thrice and so on. So gender issues are there permeating all the subjects, the natural sciences, biology, physics, definitely the medical sciences. So we need to talk about these. And as again, Paroma said, Dwaita, you also mentioned it, that it is not about one class twice a week. It's about building it into all disciplines, all subjects. And gender talks about different identities, not just women. It's about different identities. We need to talk about queer movement. We need to talk about how a body which looks like a male body might have emotions or feelings which are not subscribing to the male identity. And it's important not to taunt such children, because children who do not subscribe, conform to that identity of the body are so taunted and bullied and ragged in school. So it's important to talk about different identities, show how alternate sexualities have historically been marginalized. It's important to talk about differences, to accept differences, and to accept plurality. And we need to start young. We need to build it into all subjects. Over from me.
And with this, we come to an end of an enlightening and extremely insightful session. Thank you, friends, for lending your precious time and indulging us in an engrossing discussion. As they say, we can't go on doing more of the same thing. We have to do things differently.